electric car and van owners have been urged to abandon all future VED payments, commonly known as car tax. The call comes ahead of the upcoming autumn budget, where Chancellor Rachel Reeves could make significant changes to how motorists are taxed. What's more, the call is being backed by some very influential names, including the Association of Fleet Professionals, National Franchise Dealers Association, and the Retail Motor Industry Federation. So what are they calling for, and what does it mean for the future of motoring? Let's take a look at the facts. At the heart of this story is the work of Paul Hollick, chairman of the Association of Fleet Professionals, or the AFP. He's penned an open letter to Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Right Honourable Jeremy Hunt MP, urging him to consider scrapping vehicle excise duty charges for two types of vehicles. In his letter, Mr. Hollick highlights the fact that the current regime is doing little to help the UK meet its net zero ambitions. He argues that drivers should not be penalised for choosing vehicles that are better for the environment, and he points out that the revenues raised from these taxes are minimal, accounting for less than 1% of total government revenue. But why is this important? Well, let me explain. When Labour came to power, they pledged to green the UK's transport system as part of their wider net zero agenda. To achieve their goals, they announced a series of measures aimed at encouraging drivers to switch to cleaner vehicles. One of these measures involved reforming the way VED was applied to electric cars. Previously, electric cars had been exempt from paying any VED up until spring 2025. However, this changed with the introduction of the new rates. Now, all electric cars pay the standard rate of £195 per annum from the second year of ownership onwards. Brand new owners pay a discounted rate of just £10 in year one, which is much cheaper than petrol and diesel alternatives. But if your electric car has a list price of more than £40,000, you'll have to pay an additional £425 per annum through the expensive car supplement, commonly known as the ECS. Added together, electric car owners could well be paying a whopping £620 per year to get behind the wheel, compared to $0 just 12 months ago. In response, the AFP has hit out at the changes, describing them as counterproductive, adding heavily to running costs and creating a disincentive for consumers. In his letter to the Chancellor, Paul stresses that scrapping VED for electric cars and vans would send a clear signal that the government is committed to decarbonising transport. He says it would encourage businesses and individuals to switch to greener vehicles without the fear of being penalised. It would also simplify the tax system and make it fairer for all road users. Paul goes on to say that the government should focus on encouraging the uptake of electric vehicles rather than trying to generate revenue from them. He argues that the money raised from VED is not worth the negative impact on the environment and the economy. He also proposes that the government should work with the industry to develop a fair and sustainable solution for taxing electric vehicles. Now, this isn't the first time calls have been made to review the UK's approach to taxing electric cars. In the past, industry leaders have urged the government to reconsider the changes, saying they will damage consumer confidence and slow down the transition to electric mobility. One of the most recent calls to action came in March 2023, when the National Franchise Dealers Association and the Retail Motor Industry Federation wrote to then Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. They too called for a fundamental review of the VED system for electric cars, warning that the current regime is acting as a brake on progress towards the government's net zero ambitions. Now, I do not want to labor the point, but the reason I keep mentioning the net zero commitments is because at the core of this debate is the UK's legally binding commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The UK is committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And ultimately, the UK is aiming to reach net zero by 2050. To achieve these targets, the government has set out a number of policies aimed at decarbonising the UK's transport system. These include banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030, investing in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and providing incentives for consumers to switch to electric vehicles. But these targets are far from easy to achieve, and experts warn that the UK is currently off track. According to a recent report by the Committee on Climate Change, the UK's progress on decarbonising transport has been too slow. It highlights that emissions from road transport have remained high, and the shift to electric vehicles is not happening quickly enough. Now, the government has responded to these concerns by announcing a number of measures aimed at accelerating the transition to electric mobility. These include increasing the charging network, improving the availability of charging at home and at work, and introducing measures to support the rollout of electric vehicle charging in rural areas. But the government has also come under pressure to review the way it taxes electric vehicles. Critics argue that the current regime is not doing enough to encourage drivers to switch to electric vehicles, and that the government should do more to support the transition. So it remains to be seen whether the Chancellor will heed these calls and make changes to the way electric vehicles are taxed. Now, before we finish, I want to stress that this is a developing story and things can change quickly. So please stay tuned for updates. I'm also keen to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you think the government should scrap VEDI for electric cars and vans? Or do you think the current regime is fair? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Let's also explore some of the feedback from our community to gain a deeper understanding of the various perspectives surrounding this issue. Many of our viewers share the sentiment that the government should incentivize the adoption of electric vehicles rather than imposing taxes on them. One viewer commented, "Surely the government's goal should be to remove barriers to entry for electric vehicles, not add to them. If they want people to switch to electric, they should be offering incentives, not penalties." Another viewer echoed this sentiment, saying, "I agree, the government needs to do more to support the transition to electric mobility. Taxing electric vehicles is counterproductive and will only discourage people from switching." However, there are differing opinions regarding the fairness of taxing electric vehicles. Some viewers argue that since electric vehicles do not contribute to local air pollution, they should not be subject to road user charges, such as road tax. On the other hand, some viewers argue that electric vehicles still have an impact on the environment and society and should be taxed accordingly. For example, one viewer pointed out, although electric vehicles don't produce tailpipe emissions, the electricity they use may be generated by fossil fuels which do contribute to global warming. Additionally, the production and disposal of batteries have environmental impacts that should be considered. Another viewer added, "I understand the argument that electric vehicles are better for the environment, but they still use our roads and benefit from them. Therefore, I believe they should be subject to road user charges like any other vehicle." Moreover, some of our viewers have suggested alternative ways to tax electric vehicles that may be more equitable, one viewer proposed. Instead of taxing electric vehicles based on their purchase price, which incentivizes buyers to choose cheaper models, perhaps the government could consider taxing them based on their annual mileage or energy consumption. Another viewer suggested, why not base road tax on the space the vehicle occupies on the road? An SUV or large van should pay more than a small car. Furthermore, several viewers have criticized the government's handling of the transition to electric mobility, arguing that the lack of clarity and consistency in policies has created uncertainty and discouraged investment. One viewer commented, the constant flip-flopping and lack of long-term vision from the government makes it difficult for both consumers and businesses to plan for the future. We need a stable and supportive policy environment to drive innovation and investment in this sector. Another viewer added, the government needs to do more to support the infrastructure and services that will enable electric mobility to thrive, such as charging points and battery recycling facilities. Without these, the transition will be slow and painful. Overall, our viewers' feedback reflects the complexity and sensitivity of the debates surrounding the taxation of electric vehicles. There are valid arguments on both sides, and ultimately, the government will need to balance competing interests and priorities when making decisions. It will be interesting to see how the government responds to these calls for change and whether they are prepared to take bold action to support the transition to electric mobility. Thank you for tuning in today. Stay tuned for more updates.